welcome Meeta to the CollPoll's first thought leadership series. And having known you and getting your guidance for a long time, it's a pleasure to start with you, right? And just for our audience who will be listening to this blog interview later on, Meeta is the founder of Center for Education Strategy, and also be a very regular writer on policy related matters in education, and also an advisor to several education initiatives in the country, and also a researcher, which is a power combo of so many things, right? So Meeta, happy to have you, and I'll straight away have a quick question for you, which is, how has the typically public policy is supposed to be a very boring place to be, right? And they say who start there, they start there, but people don't easily then switch, once they have been. So now from your corporate, very active, hands-on thing, to a more thinking intellectual policy side of things, how has that journey been, and especially in the context of education?
So thank you first. Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for actually extending your own umbrella into the thinking and thought space. I'm surprised you call policy boring, because there is nothing more interesting than power, and policy is a study of power, and how power is wielded, and who wields it, and how the different forces of power interact with each other. A policy is basically, policy making is the process of channelizing that power. So the person who creates the policy then also influences the rules, and is basically the rule maker. So there is nothing more satisfying to the ego. In a way, it is bigger than money. Money will keep coming and going, but power is the one that will create these channels. So the journey from corporate to policy making was actually very, very easy for me, because my journey in corporate was also about understanding the channels of money. I started working in finance. I was with Citibank and then JP Morgan initially, commercial banking and investment banking. And for me, honestly, those were simply ways to walk in and be an insider and understand the flows of money from the inside. So the journey from corporate to policy was very easy. A little bit is also because I grew up amongst policymakers. So that was, in a way, yes, privilege, because it was not new for me. It was natural.
Got it. So quick question now, and I'm not going to keep this, this discussion, very diplomatic or politically correct. I'm going to ask some tough questions, right? So, which will bring some real perspective. See, pandemic was that a very, very critical moment for education, especially in India, right? And I'll stick to higher education, the space I understand very well is. So I call it, there is a Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh activity going on, right? So there are a lot of good institutions coming up, like the Ashokas and Plakshas and Rishihood and so many others, right? And on the other side, there are institutions, larger number, like more than 80% of the institutions, which are actually just in the maintenance mode, right? They are just watching, seeing how things are happening, right? And on the other side, there are institutions where there is creative destruction, right? There are institutions shutting down because they just couldn't go through, right? So in this context, how do you see things unfolding? Do you think a lot of the today's higher education institutions will eventually die, and there'll be a new breed of institutions that will come? So is that something that you see happening or not? That's one. Second, do you see a lot of the existing institutions sort of resurrecting themselves, making them more, hitting that refresh button? And if yes, then what fundamental changes do you see happening in them?
Yeah. You and I both, in a way, we haven't discussed it before, but we do share a very deep frustration with the way this higher education system works. Because the higher education system has been stuck in the doldrums in India, especially for the longest time. And these new institutions actually come as relief. In fact, the new institutions come as a reaction to the deep frustration with the old sticky ways of doing things. So the maintenance mode people are system driven, are the places where they are essentially Weberian bureaucracies, man. And please, students, just look up Weber. Max Weber and his work on bureaucracy. It's essentially the iron cage that sustains itself. They are self-sustaining organizations. They have a very efficient way, but they work to serve themselves, not to serve their purpose.
Mm.
Those maintenance organizations are essentially saying that we will do whatever it takes to make our organization stable. When you're talking about students and serving students, which is actually the purpose of higher education institutions, you are actually saying that with every student, I am creating a disruptor who becomes a creative disruptor and then a constructive disruptor. And to handle that chaos, you need the strength. You use the Brahma Vishnu Shivji metaphor. To create that kind of chaos and to handle that kind of chaos, you need to be the Neelkant, like Shivji. So what we need here is new institutions that are able to say, I will hold these kantbands and I will allow my students to prosper within these safe spaces. And to do that, we need a lot of guts.
I'll touch upon and I'll pick up the point on student experience or student centricity that you just mentioned, right? So obviously we work with some of the institutions like OP Jindal Global University, which has that obsession around student, where they want to make sure the students are taken care of, experience. And we also see a larger segment of the institutions where student is the most neglected stakeholder, right? And fundamentally what I've observed, the biggest difference between a great institution and an average institution is the respect and the care for the student, right? And so how do you think, with the demand and supply changing, see, earlier there were like less supply and more demand, so nobody cared about students, right? They said, okay, they will anyways come, they'll anyways take admission. And now with that changing, right, there is a lot more supply than demand, and especially quality supply now, right? Do you think student centricity is going to be a core focus? And if yes, what are the ways would you suggest institutions to become more student centered? Because in my opinion, that's one area a lot of institutions don't even have a clue, and then opening a fancy hostel or providing a great canteen is not student centricity. So one, like I said, do you see that, student centricity taking a center stage? And second, if yes, what are your suggestions to institutions in becoming more student-centered?
Brilliant question. So student centricity, especially in India, will come center stage because of demographics. And not because of the demand of the students, but because of the money they bring in. Like we said, there are two parts to the equation. There is money and there is power, if we are going to be very blunt and direct about it. And the money part of it is definitely going to pull the change. When students with monies will direct their attention towards institutions that look after them better, and we will talk about what look after them better means, then they will shift to those organizations. That's a market shift that we will see. And then the second thing is power. Student agency. Building student agency is the very purpose of higher education institutions. So far, we have been doing the very opposite of that. We've been taking agency away from the students. But if you are to prepare students for the real world, what you are doing for them is you are creating student agency so that they're able to operate independently in the world and they're able to create a great deal of value. So what does taking care of students mean? Better hostels, of course it means that. Better safety, of course it means that. But it doesn't only mean that. What it means is that you are taking care of their learning. And when you say you're taking care of their learning, what you're able to do is diversity and inclusion are big buzzwords over here. But this is diversity and inclusion and excellence for each student, which means you are able to provide wraparound learning care for their learning value add, not just outcomes. Wraparound learning care for each student. And this wraparound learning care is what institutions will need to start building as they go forward.
I think the learning care, you just brought out a very important part, which is the learning care. And that's what I'll ask the next question on. So I obviously break down learning into an in-classroom and outside classroom learning, right? So that there is something the students learn inside the classroom, and then there is so much more they learn outside the classroom. And unfortunately, what institutions largely focus on is only what students are going to be learning inside the classroom and very less on outside the classroom. So breaking these two down, and I have two questions on this, and I'll start with the first. Now, with access to quality content available to the students, do you think the lectures are going to have that same value anymore? because the student's going to say that I have access to much better lectures, right, online. Why do I need to come and sit in a theory class, which I can get access to. So which means is there a more like a larger importance of tutorials and engagements and like other things that's going to increase as against theory, where there are far better quality content available to students?
Yeah. So one thing I realize is that I haven't shared with you the 8 beam hybrid learning environment framework that I have just released in a couple of days ago. And I must share that with you. Look it up. It's on YouTube, and it answers exactly this question. How do you create these learning environments? Uh, the simple answer to this is actually a question. What is a lecture and what is a classroom? Because both of these concepts, again, are in the middle of the creative destruction that you mentioned earlier. The classroom is not just is not the box. The lecture is not just the download of content. What does a lecturer actually do in a classroom? Is it only a download of content? If it is only a download of content, then they have already been disintermediated away. If the classroom is only a room with 4 walls where everybody gathers, that's already a gone thing. I mean, you and I are literally sitting in one virtual room together right now. We don't need 4 walls in the same geographical space. So the space element, in fact, has been eliminated from our space-time continuum in this education space right now. So then what does a lecturer really do to create value in the classroom in or during the lecture? What we used to call classroom, what we used to call lecture. They inspire, they energize, they build communities of learning, they build connect, and a few other things that they do. You build that peer engagement within students. Now, what we need to focus on in the future is to focus on these value added elements. So it's about building those energy fields and love for the subject.
So now we're speaking a lot about the teachers, their motivations, right? So one of the trends that I'm seeing, Meeta, and that's very alarming also, is that a lot of the good teachers are now more attracted towards the edtechs as compared to the institutions, right? Because of flexibility, because of the reach that they offer, right, to students, also because of the economic reasons, right? They are finally getting paid what they should have been, right, as against that they were, right? So how do you see the talent crunch? We were anyways, short on good teachers. Now there is a edtech pool which is actually, taking away good teachers because of several good reasons, in my opinion, right? How do you see the talent crunch in teaching going to be addressed going forward?
You said you'd be provocative. Let me come back to you. Who is asking this question? The system that serves itself, the Weberian iron cage, because it wants to preserve itself? Because if I say, oh dear, if I answer, say, oh no, we have a problem here, our teachers are going away. Who is this we?
Yeah.
This we is basically the system, right? The dhancha, the skeleton out here. And are we here to serve that skeleton, that iron cage, or are we here to serve students and the cause of learning and knowledge? We are clearly here to serve students and knowledge. And if students, and this is a big if, because we genuinely do not have positive proof of this yet, if students are better served by edtech, then we are still working towards our purpose. Our problem here is that edtech learning outcomes have still not given any hardcore data to say that students are actually served better purely by edtech, which is why our next effort as educators is to create optimum, in fact, maximizing, not optimizing. We want to create maximizing hybrid learning environments so that we get the best of everything.
So CollPoll is sort of anti-edtech in some ways, because our mission is to help institutions be far better than where they are, and in a way because they're also competing with the edtechs, right, of the world. So it's like we're like sort of we're helping institutions, like go to hit the refresh button, be the 2.0 version, right, with the tech, and so they have the best of what they already know very well, which like plus the tech element into it, right? So question is that what I fear, and this is something I had an argument against him in the skilling piece early on, is that the not I would say that hunger for employment could be extremely badly, exploited, right? So imagine an organization coming and saying, hey, don't go for a full-time undergrad program. I'm going to give you a 2-year, program
Yeah.
or whatever, and you will get a job, which I think is great, but in the long term, people without the base, without the attitude, without the, the larger knowledge, they're not, it's in my personal opinion, it's dangerous.
You're absolutely right that college and higher education gives much more than mere content. And I think this is where we have to realize, we just said that the lecture itself is going to evolve, right? So as the lecture evolves, the learning, the formal and the informal learning, or rather the real value add definition of institutions has to change. That has to be part of the new hybrid learning environment that they create. And I am saying that EdTech is actually just an add-on resource. You are providing the spine to which they can attach themselves. What you at CollPoll are doing is you're building this institutional spine. And in building this institutional spine, you are saying that you can detach some old ways that do not work and you can attach new ways that work. But who holds the very soul of this body that is being created? CollPoll provides a spine. EdTech is little bit add-ons, bits of, for some it's a bit of nail polish, for some it's a kidney transplant, for some institutions. It is like that. But who holds the soul, the real value add, the peer learning, the interactions, the fights that students they have with each other, the sports that they play, the teamwork, the peer learning? That is going to become the essential soul of the organization. Now, if that is stripped away and you're left only with the employability part, which is the fear you expressed, then we think we have a problem, but we only have a problem if we look at it from a 3 to 5 year perspective. What if you think of institutions as learning organizations for life? So, for example, my alma mater has now started inviting alumni into their lectures again. So, those of us who graduated 20, 30 years ago, we can join lectures all over again. Many have been offering executive education, other options, but here we are included as one of the family. So, suppose we missed out on some part of learning in the early years. What we are doing now is by extending, and that's what I said, the new game in town is not thinking of it as the same time plus space in a classroom. It is not 40 minutes in 4 walls boxes.
Got it.
You extend the time dimension of this and you suddenly have a whole new reframing and understanding. So what if you were able to it's not a problem if you enable students to learn and earn very quickly in 2 years. You gave them coding classes and they were able to earn $50,000 in the first year. Great for them. But they themselves and institutions need to recognize that all of education did not happen. So give them the hooks, give them reasons, give them pathways to come back for that learning.
Yeah.
Give them communities.
Very, very profound thought, Meeta, and it obviously makes me think as well and challenge some of the thought processes I have. So, a big question there. Do you think our education regulatory bodies are prepared for this new, like, I'm just thinking, yeah, you're saying absolutely, it makes so much sense that, hey, so what, that a student can start earning in 2 years, great, but the learning can't just stop there. So maybe the guy has not picked up some, some personality and other skills, but eventually probably not in the second, but the third or the fourth or the fifth year, the guy can pick, right? Like all of us continue to scale up, like upskill ourselves all the time in all the ways, right? Which is very profound. But here where we talk about where the regulatory bodies are saying, hey, X years the program needs to be completed, and this is what, this program can have 3 years, this can have 4 years. Are our regulatory bodies prepared for this new sort of the new universe of education that's unfolding? And will that also hold back some of our good institutions who might want to, experiment with these new models, who might want to evolve, but the regulations might keep them back?
When have regulatory bodies ever been ahead of industry? In any industry, regulatory bodies by definition are always creating catch up, playing catch up all the time. And regulation and Indian higher education is possibly the most over regulated, in fact chaotically over regulated way of doing things. So the concern is real. Will they be able to keep up? No, they will not. Will this be a problem? Yes, it will be a problem. Is there a way to resolve this? In the immediate term, it will be a lot of effort. And the question is, who will make that effort, right? Who is paid to make that effort? Because this is about seeding a pathway for the future. Because what you need to do is you need to move away from a regulatory mindset to a governance mindset. And a governance mindset in India seems to be a monitoring and inspection thing, but governance really means a self-improving cycle. You are creating cycles of self-improvement. And that is what governance means. So who is going to invest in this governance? Who is going to invest in creating thought leadership circles for this governance, and then invest in building communities where regulators say, we need to think ahead. Look at Delhi Airport. Delhi Airport was built far ahead of the capacity that was needed for it at that time. This is what we need to do in education. We need to build capacities that are far ahead of us at this point of time. And to do that, we need to bring in a governance mindset into regulation.
And that brings me to my, my second last question, which is, I think, new education policy puts a lot of good things out there. And we are seeing institutions also showing some interest in it, right? In adopting. How practically, what time frame do you see it will take, for our institutions? And I'm not talking about the top tier institutions, but the larger mid-market, right? How much time do you think it will take for them to actually adopt it, right? Because see, choice-based credit system is a scam in most of the Indian institutions, right? Asking students to choose from 2 courses in specific only periods and then giving those options only in limited terms is not really choice-based credit system, right? The true flexibility is yet to come in our universities, where there's actual choice of courses with full flexibility, right? It's not. It's still very regulated choice-based credit system, right? So talking about to talk about real flexibility, academic bank of credit, multiple entry exit, having multiple learning pathways with multiple majors, minors, and all. Do you think we are prepared for that? Do you think institutions are even prepared from a resource perspective? Because see, to offer this flexibility, you require far more teaching resources, right? You need far more teachers in the campus and other. So because that's the only limit, that's the only thing that's limiting institutions to offer courses. So in any ways, a space which is becoming more competitive, more complex. Now you're asking institutions to have more faculty members to bring in more flexibility and more learning pathways. Is it really going to happen? Except the top institutions. I'm not talking about the Ashokas and the Bennett and the OP Jindals of the country. I'm talking about the mid-market, right? Are they even going to ever be able to do this?
One of the challenges we have here is fear. And fear and greed, they say, are the only 2 forces. That's what they teach us in finance. I told you I started in finance. There isn't enough of a pull factor here to say, why should I get better? Because I'm doing really well. I'm making enough money. And that becomes a challenge. And the fear is, if I change, then am I going to mess up something that works quite well for me right now? Again, serving the institution kind of thing. So the challenge is real. Also, the fact remains that the resources that you need to make this change happen don't actually exist. You have to customize and create those resources. So when you say flexibility, what does flexibility mean to a professor? To a professor, a typical professor, it means their ability to choose their class timings, right? That is not what we are talking about here at all, right? What we're talking about is creating an integrated system that works in an aligned manner and yet gives wraparound learning care for our students. That is a huge ask. That is such a big ask that in a way it is almost impossible for a regular system to comprehend. And to build this step by step, making it visual change is going to take a lot of time. I think when you asked how much time is it going to take, I will say at least 7 to 10 years. This is a 7 to 10 year journey if you are actively working at it all the time.
One question there, Meeta. Do you think also this challenge of the number of faculty members and the other infrastructure institutions have. Do you think that's also a huge problem in India, because our universities and colleges are heavily dependent on the tuition fee for their operations, unlike, let's say, US, where research, endowments, and other form a large part of the and that's why they're able to afford more faculty members and have more teachers in the campus. That's where the flexibility comes in. They're able to offer programs where they might be lesser of the students enrolling, but still they would continue to. Is that also because the institutions are very heavily dependent on the tuition fees here as against the US counterparts?
I mean, there's definitely a challenge of funding everywhere. The US, the UK, so many other countries, the higher education sector is facing a huge resource crunch. So much so that the brunt of it is being borne by junior faculty. The
Mm,
first 15 years of junior faculty, very often they can't even support themselves. So the
mm,
problem is very, very similar to India. The
mm,
first 14, 15 years of junior faculty salary is really not good enough. And
mm,
that's from an individual point of view. From an institutional point of view, just juggling all the money, resources, etc., is a struggle. It's an everyday challenge. Do we make this choice or do we make that choice? We know we need to invest in ed tech, but how are we going to do it? Building this flexibility, every flexibility comes with a huge cost. This is where technology comes in, where scale up is actually not so much of a cost per individual. So we need to find technology solutions that come in, and that's a whole other conversation that you will have. But I think more importantly, we need to find functional and process solutions to this as well. So we have traditionally thought of universities as ivory tower, inward-looking organizations, where all expertise is within the organization. Whereas if we just invert it and we create a hub and spoke model, our institutions are now old enough to have alumni in their 40s, 50s, 60s who want to give back to the institution. Bring them in for guest lectures, but don't bring them in untrained. Anybody who is an expert is not a teacher. They're definitely not a teacher. So build in those interactions. They work as lifelong learning for your alumni as well, and they work as support systems to expand the scope, the recency of what you deliver to your students, etc. We need to open up the system and we need to restructure it in a manner that works in a way that serves this flexibility. You are not alone, professors, you are not alone. You do not have to build those walls around yourselves. Just bring others in, restructure.
Got it. Got it. Hey, so this has been a great conversation, Meeta. So my final question for Indian higher education specifically, what are your top 3 predictions?
Top 3 predictions for Indian higher education. One, it will become more and more important for a very large proportion of the population. I am expecting GER to easily go up to 50% really, especially as, and this is the second prediction, either because of demographic requirements or because of funding requirements, it will be forced to open up and create executive education kind of modules and therefore become a city hub or a local or a regional hub for learning. So that is the second prediction, that it will have to open up to different types of learning. And the third prediction is that higher education in India will continue to look the same from the outside while transforming itself on the inside for the next maybe 20, even 25 years. You will look at it and you'll say, oh, this was very similar to what we used to see 20, 30, 40 years ago. But on the inside, there will be a giant transformation. And because higher education is not, people are not hardcore marketing people or PR people, they will not be able to share this transition outside and they will need help. Because what we're going to do is going to be wonderful.
So you're saying, but that manthan will go on for these years.
The manthan has begun. It cannot be stopped now.
No. Perfect. So thank you for taking time out for this conversation, Meeta. It was such a pleasure, to have this open conversation with you.
Thank you so much. Very, very enjoyable conversation. As ever, very thought-provoking.